extremely proud to be here amongst all you singers and writers. I mean, we've been doing this for several years now, and it's, excuse my French, it's pretty damn awesome. So, thank you very much. I've been reading from my memoir, and I've got a couple of young folks here that have raced with me and trained with me. And how many have ever rappelled off of a cliff?
Oh.
All right.
You ever been to
Good. Then you'll understand it. I want to tell you about the first adventure race I ever did solo. But first I'll tell you a little bit about the training for it. I had a good friend who was a former Army Ranger. Brian Ellis was his name, and he had served with the 2nd Battalion, 75th Rangers during the 80s. He served in Africa and Latin America. He didn't talk much about it, but he had been in Honduras when we weren't supposed to be in Honduras. Remember Reagan and the Iran-Contra deal? This guy was the real McCoy. He was also a great mountain climber, having climbed El Capitan several times, sleeping in hammocks tacked into the side of a cliff several hundred feet in the air. He was also an emergency room nurse, trained paramedic. Anyway, he had done several adventure races on different teams and a couple by himself, or solo as we called it. He had often told me, Baker, one of the best ways to put a notch in your 6-gun is to do a solo adventure race. Does that sound like a challenge to you? Well, it did to me. Brian had done a race up in Virginia on the head of the New River called the Odyssey Extreme. It was a 30-hour race reputed to be very difficult, to have a very difficult rope course. Brian was also doing it solo at the ripe age of 29. I was doing it at the age of 57. Oh, by the way, the race was put on by a director, and the old boy's name was Jeff Manning. He was a former Navy SEAL. That should tell you something about the race layout. Brian and I ran and biked on tons of old logging roads, rappelled on almost every rock cliff in Jackson County. We also trained on a hell of a cliff in Transylvania County called Looking Glass Rock. It was a 400-foot rappel. If you are ready, I'll tell you about it. We drove over to Haywood County and hit Highway 76, turned up through Caruso, climbed up in the Wagon Wheel Gap under the parkway, turned right on the Fish Hatchery Road and parked looking at the north face of that huge dome of rock. No sweat, GI. We rode our mountain bikes over towards the base of the cliff on an old road, hid them in the bush. I have to make this one point. Everybody calls these roads bike trails and hiking trails, which they are, but at one time, years ago, most of them were logging roads. Either truck roads or skid trails, but few people want to give the logger credit for anything. Just saying. Back to the training. We ran back to the truck, which was only about a mile, and drove around to the main parking lot for the big rock. We grabbed our packs, threw in 250-foot ropes or rappel gear and a little water. It is about a mile and a half from the parking lot to the top of the dome when we jogged it. Brian had done this rappel several times before, so I simply followed his lead. We walked off the back side of the cliff, past the warning signs, don't do this, for 100 feet before we tied the ropes together and grabbed the connected rope, or wrapped the connected ropes around a large pine tree we were going to use as an anchor. Remember, the rappel was 400 feet. I asked him how this was going to work. Baker, just follow me. I will rappel down first at about 200 feet. There is a small ledge with several anchors driven into the cliff. I will stop there and unhook from the rope. Then I will hook the extra carabiner that is attached to our harness, he tapped the carabiner, to the anchor and holler for you to rappel on down. If everything goes well and you are on the ledge with me, I will pull the rope around that pine tree and catch it as it slides down. What if you don't catch it, dude? Baker, are you nervous? Kiss my ass and tell me your plan. He laughed. I simply tie one end of the rope to my carabiner. You want to be an airborne ranger, don't you? He was laughing as he began his rappel down the cliff. But he was gone. few seconds later, I heard him sing or shout, "Your turn, Ranger Baker." I wrapped the double repel line around my figure 8 and leaned back to test it. Started down the face of the cliff in short 2-foot leaps. It is often said that there is a fine line between bravery and stupidity. And there is also a fine line between repelling to standing up straight when your feet will slip and leaning back too far when you will go over backward. Practice, practice, practice. About 30 seconds later, I was standing on that ledge near Brian. Very carefully, I leaned forward, hooked my carabiner to the anchor. Only then did I unhook the repel rope from my figure 8 and hand it to Brian. Talk about a pucker factor. Brian tied one end of the rope to his extra carabiner and began pulling the other end of the rope down from around the pine tree. That end of the rope disappeared, and a few seconds later, there came the entire 300 foot of rope tumbling down the cliff. It's not that heavy, but when you're standing on a ledge attached to an anchor 200 feet in the air, well, anyway. Brian caught the rope and soon had it slid through another anchor. He then attached the rope to his figure 8 again, unhooked himself from the anchor, and smiled at me. Ranger was all I heard as he began his repel with a 10-foot leap. It was a cold day, maybe just above freezing, with the wind blowing around 10 to 20 miles an hour, and old memories suddenly came flashing back. I looked around at the huge dome of a rock I was attached to, like I did the first time I ever walked out the tailgate of a C-130. Wind screaming in your ears, you're flying 1,200 feet above the drop zone, and the jump master is saying, "Just jump, soldier, just jump." I finally jumped. Oh, a quick note here. When I jumped from the tailgate, I tucked so hard that my helmet came off. It floated in front of me for a second, and I fought the urge to reach out and grab it. Then my chute dragged me back into the world. Luckily, my helmet didn't hit anybody on the way down. I found that helmet after I hit the ground. It had a big dent in it. Wished I could have kept it for a souvenir. Back to my story. I was a little awestruck on that cliff, just like back at Fort Lee in rigger school. I was standing on that small ledge about 6 inches wide, 200 feet in the air above the valley floor. My carabiner was attached to an anchor that God only knows who had pounded into a crevice in the rock, and I was hooked to it with my harness. That thin piece of metal was all that kept me from about 5 seconds of terrifying flight and an ugly landing. They told us many times in jump school at Benning that it was not the fall that would kill you, it was that sudden stop at the bottom.
Absolutely.
I'm sure they were right.
Hoorah.
Airborne. With my head full of memories, I didn't hear Brian's voice at first. I figured he would shout when he reached the bottom, but no sound had come. Finally, I heard my voice, my name floating on the wind. "Baker, Baker, come on down." It was my turn. "Just jump, soldier." I will tell you that as easy it may sound, unhooking yourself from a secure anchor while your feet are on a 6-inch ledge and you are 200 feet in the air is not easy. Carefully, I followed his lead and placed the repel rope around my figure 8, grabbed the rope above the anchor with my left hand, with my right hand, which is your brake on the descent, as you guys know, unhooked myself from the anchor. Okay, you're 200 feet in the air. Did I say that before? You're balancing on a narrow ledge, and you start remembering your first parachute jump. I want to be an airborne ranger. I took a deep breath, slid my right hand down the repel rope as far as I could reach, and wrapped it around my right hip. It became my brake, and now I was ready. I remember looking around for a second, taking a deep breath, leaning back, and beginning my first of many short hops down the face of that cliff. Brian patted me on the back as I unhooked from the rope, and we drank a beer and then jumped on our bicycles.